Hello everyone, welcome to this conversation on Oxford vaccines. Today I'm really excited to have with me here my college advisor from the University of Oxford, Dr. Ahmed Salman. More important than his identity as my college advisor is that he has been working on the Oxford vaccine since April last year. Thanks to his and the whole team's relentless efforts, Oxford was able to produce one of the world's first safe and effective vaccines for COVID-19. Welcome, Dr. Salman.
Welcome, Dr. Tasnim. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure.
I know you have just finished working in the lab and it must feel exhausted, so I really appreciate you giving us the time. I had invited my audience to send in their questions about the Oxford vaccine, and we received more than 500 questions in a few hours. We will not be able to go through all of them, but I will ask you the questions that have come up again and again. So we will now talk about the side effects of the vaccine. We know that the vaccine has not been around for a long time. It has been given to human beings just for a few months, and with that limited data, a lot of people are worried about the long-term side effects. So how worried should they be? What are the potential long-term side effects that we are anticipating from the vaccine?
So the safety is a key thing. When you try to license a vaccine, it's a key thing. You cannot really argue about or negotiate about a vaccine safety. And that's a very important parameters. And especially that you give the vaccine to people that already like not sick or healthy people, and there's a huge chance they will not be infected in the future. But there's nothing risk-free. And at the end of the day, you do risk assessment. Of course, there's an acceptable level of risk, and I would say all the licensed vaccine, they should be safe, and they shouldn't show any like side effects based on that clinical trials results, and they will be followed for the long term. And of course, any medication or any drug that might have side effects on a special group of people. By example, for the vaccine in general, we know people who have allergies or problem in the immune system. These people need to be considered to be checked carefully before giving them the vaccines. Pregnant females and of course breastfeeding females, all this also need to be considered not to be in any trials part. Maybe that will come as a future after a long-term check of the vaccine safety. But based on the results and giving this urgent approval, of course, you do the risk assessment. I would just say, based on the vaccine that now have been used at least in 10 million people, Pfizer vaccine has been injected for at least 10 million people till date. At least million people in the UK, there's 3 millions in the USA and many countries around the world. Of course, you don't use them for people who have allergies or hypersensitivities or problems or history with the immune system. And you don't use them for children under 16 years old because it has not been tested in this group of people. And then by maybe the long term, they will be approved and they have to do more testing to allow for children. But how many cases do you hear about having severe out of these like 10 million people vaccinated from Pfizer as example? Of course, Oxford has not been used out of the clinical trials yet, but based on the data, it's safe. And the same technology has been used for at least 18 years or 20 years from now in different type of research or medical intervention, either for cancer immunotherapy. And of course, you know, people with cancer have a very like unstable immune system and they are immunocompromised, has been for genotherapy, it has been like an approach for different vaccines. So to get that point of getting the approval, this means they are very, very safe. Of course, nothing like absolutely safe or free of risk. But if you think about out of, I would say, taking Pfizer, maybe there's some announced data of people show some hypersensitivity or whatever, but that's still treatable within a few days compared to like maybe 10, 20 people, and that's out of 10 millions, can be very accepted risk compared to if these people are infected with a death rate or mortality rate over 2 or 3%, then you speak out of million infections, you have at least 30,000 deaths. So of course, that's a completely accepted risk during the pandemic. And that needs to be followed up by like watching the vaccine closely to record all the side effects. But till now, I would say any approved vaccines, after finishing all the scientific clinical trials and testings, if it can be used, I would greatly recommend people to start using it immediately to put a control on the pandemic.
The vaccine has been trialed in many countries, but some people are worried that their genetic makeup might be different to the people that the vaccine has been tested on. So would the Oxford vaccine be effective for people living in Bangladesh, people from India, or Southeast Asia in general?
That's a very important thing, and that's why uh, like you do phase 3 clinical trials. You try to include people from different genetic backgrounds, from different races, and so on, to see we have different, of course, genetic structures, we have different immune systems, and we respond in a different way at certain extent. So, but I would say based on phase 3 clinical trials, when you do it in these populations like mixed population, I would say in UK, in US, they are very, very mixed. They have, of course, like Indian, African, Europeans. It's not only the volunteers, you take only people from like original race from that country. You know how it is diverse here in UK or US or like Latin America. And of course, you have to do it on multiple sides. So the preliminary data for phase 3 that has been published now, it's based on thousands of volunteers in UK, which is again like very diverse, South Africa and Latin America and Brazil. And that's really represent the major like different variations in races and backgrounds, genetic backgrounds. And still more studies are coming on. As I mentioned, like AstraZeneca, they aim to reach 60,000 volunteers in total. The first part was 24,000, but they will include maybe like people from US, people from Japan, from India, from Kenya, to also show more about how the diversity can affect that immune response. But I would say based on the current data and doing these clinical trials in a really diverse populations, you can confidently say it's worked for different races. But of course, that's like will not harm to do further studies and to show that or confirm that.
Is there a sort of timeline when we can know about whether these vaccines are safe and effective in children? When might we be able to know?
I mean, ideally, you want to give the vaccine and then wait, I would say, as an average 6 months to show how that can generate protection, leave the people for the natural exposure to the virus, and of course, to show also how it's safe and if there's any side effects will appear during that period. Of course, the side effects due to the immune system, that might appear within like, I would say hours after injecting the vaccines or like weeks maximum. But then you will see the real side infection, I would say months, couple of months, 3 months or 6 months will give you a good reading. And that could give you the ability to decide if it's safe or not.
Okay, so we will move on to the next question. We know that viruses mutate all the time, but some recent variants have raised concerns whether they will make the vaccine ineffective. So how confident are we that the Oxford vaccine can offer protection from these recent variants and also potential future variants? Also, Dr. Salman, if you could tell us about the variants that we've identified in the UK and in the South Africa, and we know that the variant in South Africa poses a bit more of challenge to the vaccine in terms of offering protection from COVID-19.
I will take that part first about different variants. So, of course, there's different type of vaccines. If we just focus on the vaccines that are approved so far, which is mainly targeting the spike protein only. Of course, there's other technologies that might, for other vaccines that might be approved like in the following days. But for these, they only target the virus in the spike protein. So we only care about the variants that has changes or mutations in the spike protein coding sequence. Of course, till now, what has been announced about all these variants, they are not completely like changing their spike proteins. And all these three vaccines announced they're still efficient and working against, they can generate good protection against these variants. Now, to go back to the vaccine with a little bit more detail. So the spike protein, it's a huge protein. And that's something that brings more confidence. And that's what make like people work in vaccine development, feeling that's possible to make a vaccine for that virus. So it's nearly 1,300 amino acids, and that's a huge protein. And what will be targeted by the immune system, by the B cells or the T cells, which is the target for any vaccines, because these are the two types of cells that can generate memory. And then if you induce them or stimulate them by vaccines, they will differentiate to a memory cells that can protect you if you see the natural infections later. So they only build their memory against a very tiny structure that we call epitope, which is between 8 to 11 amino acids, which is mean that if you have 1,000 or 1,300 amino acid protein, when that protein digested and presented, that will generate at least 100 or 200 epitopes. And of course, it's happening in a very random way. You don't just cut the protein every 10 amino acids. No, you cut from 1 to 9, and then from 2 to 8 to 11, and then you make all these different possibilities and present it to the immune system. So that generates a huge number of epitopes. And then if you have 1 or 2 or even 10 mutations, if they are all in the spike protein, you still have, I would say, hundreds or tenth of different B cells, antibodies, or T cells. They can target the virus in different parts of the spike protein. Now, till now, based on what I announced, as I just mentioned, all the 3 vaccines, they said they're still efficient. Maybe in the long term, till now, the virus mutated between 25 to 30 times. But maybe after like 1 year or 2 years, you don't know when actually, if the virus mutates dramatically or significantly by changing so many places and mutating different parts of the spike protein, you might need to then improve or redesign your vaccines. But of course, improving or developing a vaccine, it's a way much easier process compared to inventing and testing new vaccines. So I would use the flu example again. So every year we have to redesign and develop the flu vaccine. So that takes 2 to 3 months based on the mathematical modeling and which virus we have now. So till now, we don't need to do that. People who have the approved vaccines, they're still efficient against these variants. And if we need in the long term, after 1 or 2 years, we don't know when, that might happen at the long term. And then developing a vaccine will not take that long time. So there's a good confidence in that. The only key things about the new variants is that there's some thoughts they can spread faster compared to the old variants. And there's no change on the symptoms or the severity of the virus or even the percentage of death from these infected people. But of course, if you have more people infected, that will increase the number of deaths because it's a percentage of that. Yeah. And you don't want to reach the point that people will die because they don't have the space or in the healthcare, and they don't have the ability to take the medications or even to put that pressure on the healthcare systems. So that's the key things, to put all these restrictions these days to avoid having so many cases, and not the worry about the new variants or how they will affect the vaccine efficiency at the moment.
Right, okay. So essentially, if the spike protein changes dramatically in some point in future, we might have to modify the vaccine. So we would have to keep an eye on the virus, on the genomic sequence, and see whether there has been a dramatic change or not. So as long as we keep an eye, and then if need be, we modify the vaccine, we should be able to stay on top. And for now, all our existing licensed COVID vaccines should be effective against the current variants.
That's what has been announced so far. And I know that like Sanger Institute, they take different isolates and they do genome sequencing for the virus in a weekly basis to, of course, keep an eye on the virus variants. And yeah, maybe at some point we will need to improve the vaccine, but till now, we don't need to do that.
How did the vaccine get developed so quickly? A lot of people have asked this question, and the view from them is that a vaccine which is developed at such a pace might have dangerous side effects as well. Have we cut corners? Have we missed important steps in the development? How reliable is the Oxford vaccine?
That's a very important point, and it's always important to clarify the process, then you gain the people's trust on that. So what used to be in a vaccine development, it takes, of course, years, 5 to 10 years as a standard, if you are like in ideal situations. The vaccines that like got the fastest approval was taking 4 years. And that's like was the old record. Now, like we broke that. But I can say that there's lots of time will be spent on raising the funding and organizing with the regulators and saving like the time to generate all these steps of manufacturing and so on. And then what we can see, I would say at least 80 to 90% of the time will be wasted on that. And of course, to get a funding, you have to publish the results. And then based on these like preliminary results, you can ask to move to the second phase of clinical trials and so on. And it's a huge amount of funding. And there's a huge risk also of like failure at the end. So what happened with Oxford, it's not like one day experience. I mean, they work in vaccine development for years. And that platform using the adenovirus or chimpanzee adenovirus, it have been used for like a long period. And one of the key things that really speeded this process is that since Ebola time, there were like lots of shouting from experts in the field, that's a pandemic, but it's not the one that we worry about. It's infected nearly like 26,000 people, and of course caused more than 11,000 deaths. But this is not the world pandemic that we worry about. We might get a worse thing soon, and the Ebola proved that the world is not ready for something like that. So they established here projects, and that was led by Professor Sarah Gilbert and Professor Adrian Hill, the head of the group, and the head of the institute. So they call it Pandemic X, which is mean you have to prepare things and put things together, being ready for a pandemic that might happen anytime. Then you have steps and vaccine platform, and you have funding, and you have some agreements with manufacturers and agreement with the governments and the regulators. So once this happens, you can just kick off. You don't need to wait and then think what I should do now. And that was a huge thing to speed up this process, putting all the paperwork together, just waiting for something to happen and preparing everything in advance. So at the beginning, there were like a list of 10 or 20 diseases. They were like at the top of the list. And to be honest, the one was at the top of the list was the flu, not the coronavirus, although it was one of the probabilities or like the one in the list. But then both were like respiratory like diseases that mainly transmitted by respiratory system. And that's really speeded things. So once the pandemic happened, or once even like the Chinese scientists announced the genomic structure of the virus, it was possible just to have the structure, design the vaccine, put it in the ready platform, form the adenovirus, the chimpanzee adenovirus, and then we had the manufacturing facility next door, so then they can make the first batch for doing the phase 1 clinical trials. There was some agreement with companies. There were the funding ready from the government. And that's even by March when the cases increases here in UK. There were like even more and more funding and more attention. So, to publish something in Lancet or Nature, ideally that takes years. And now you submit it within a week. You have all the reviewers dedicated for that. You have all the scientists dedicated for that. No one basically allowed in like, I would say, academia or government or like these regulatory things to even look to another disease or another type of research. So that's, of course, make all that difference without cutting anything from the key scientific important steps, mainly the safety, the efficacy, and of course, following up the volunteers and getting a solid read out. Of course, that's not the end of it. I would say at least phase 3 started from 22nd of May. So that's nearly 7 months from now. And that can give you really a clear reading about how the immune system respond to vaccine or to a foreign protein or injection. And if there's a side effect and so on. Of course, you need to follow up in the long term, what we call it phase 4. That takes, of course, 5 years, 10 years. And then you keep record all the predicted side effects or the side effects that didn't appear in that like number of 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 volunteers in the clinical trials. Yeah. So then you can see it in millions of people.
I think, Dr. Salman, what I am getting from you is that no scientific steps were missed, but everything kind of came together for this vaccine, from funding to other scientists, to the whole group, to regulators. So all of the hurdles, like you said, from one step to the other, it takes a lot of time, get published, and then that gets reviewed, and then move on to the next phase. But for this vaccine, it didn't I mean, we could start the next step almost immediately after the previous step was completed and we were happy with it. And also, I think years of work, like you said, went into kind of getting ready for a pandemic so that we are in a position, or really Oxford is in a position to quickly churn out a vaccine if a pandemic hits. And like you said, as soon as the genome came out of China, scientists at Oxford were at work trying to develop a vaccine.
Exactly. So there were no cutting at all from the important steps, which is, of course, you cannot do that with having this independent regulators and so on. And not just like starting immediately the next step. We had overlapping steps. So we started phase 1 in the 23rd of April. And then once there were like some safety data started to be collected, phase 3, phase 2 were like merged and started in the 22nd of May, which is nearly 4 weeks afterwards, which has never happened in normal situation. So that's, of course, give you more time to follow up, not just like the people from phase 1, which will be like 100 people. Then no, you have like 24,000 people. You can follow them for at least 6 or 7 months, which will give you a solid rating.
Right. Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. We know that there has been no trial comparing Oxford vaccine with the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, comparing them head to head. But on paper, it looks like the Oxford vaccine is less effective than the other two. So is it fair to say that if I were to receive the Oxford vaccine, I would have more chances of getting COVID in place of, say, I got any of the other two vaccines?
That's a very important question. And just to clarify a few points based on my understanding, that of course, Oxford vaccine, based on the recently published results, and that of course will be supported by another clinical trials still running, because there's part of the clinical trials which is the biggest running by AstraZeneca in USA and Japan and Kenya and India, and that will include more than another 30,000 volunteers. So that will support, of course, these data about efficacy and protection and so on. But the key things is that what have been proven, and that's a parameter that Oxford consider when they establish the clinical trials or design the clinical trials, is that to check if there's any like people who have asymptomatic infection, are infectious or not. And that parameter have not been checked by Pfizer or Moderna, because that's required to take a swab from patient or volunteers in a weekly basis and check if they are having asymptomatic infections and they can transmit the disease. So that's a very important thing. What Oxford vaccine tested and proved that they can avoid the asymptomatic infection transmission. So even if you, as an average, it's give protection for nearly 70% of the people, 100% of the people who had the infection, they don't need to be hospitalized, or they don't show any severe symptoms that require them to be like in the hospital, and they will not transmit the disease, which is really important for like controlling the pandemic and breaking the chain. Compared to, of course, Pfizer and Moderna, they didn't test that parameter. They showed that the people who got the vaccine, nearly 90 or 95% of them, they will not show any symptoms. But they might be maybe infectious, or you cannot really say the 100% protected. They could be just asymptomatic as well, because you didn't test that parameters. But what is the key things that you can confidently say about all these 3 vaccines that got approval so far? They are safe, and they basically can protect from the severe side effect or symptoms of the disease, which is very important things. I can just give an example, of course, for a different disease, just to show how is that important. Like every year, nearly everyone in the plants get flu infections, but they don't need to be hospitalized, or like very, very few numbers, they can be hospitalized. And these people, they are targeted by giving them the flu shot, as example. So if you reach that point that people, even if they are infected, they don't show symptoms, they don't need to be hospitalized, they don't show severe symptoms or death, that's very important things. And that's what have been proven by Oxford vaccine during the clinical trials.
Right. So one of the edges that the Oxford vaccine has compared to the others, for now, as far we know up to now, is that it has tested whether people are getting asymptomatic COVID as well, and we know that with Oxford vaccine, the rate is low for asymptomatic infection and transmission as well. And that's important in controlling a pandemic, because we also want transmission to be low in order for the pandemic to end.
Exactly. And another key point is that the possibility to scale up this vaccine. So when you speak about Oxford vaccine compared to Moderna or Pfizer, because they use a very novel technology relying on the messenger RNA, that's make not so many people in the world they can help in the manufacturing. So that's put some pressure on them to be able to produce many doses. So what they announced, they will try to produce within 2021 from half to 1.3 billion doses. While Oxford, based on using the chimpanzee adenovirus technology, which has been used to produce vaccines, and there's even some approved vaccines for that, like the Ebola vaccine recently approved using the same technology, or has been used also for gene therapy or cancer immunotherapy. So there's so many places they can help in the scaling up, and that's make a company like AstraZeneca announce that they are able to produce nearly 4 billion doses in 2021. In addition to that, the logistics required for transporting and storage, that's of course much easier, which is just normal fridge from 2 to 8 degrees, compared to -70 for Pfizer, which will add also to the cost and the logistics. And another thing is the cost, which is 2 doses of Oxford vaccine will be nearly $4 or $6 compared to $40 or $50 from Moderna or Pfizer. So that's going to make it easily available, can be easily distributed, reach more people in the planet. And that's going to, of course, have a huge impact on the pandemic. And that's very important, as I said, to generate kind of protection and avoid the severe infection, avoid the need for being admitted to the hospital, compared to just immunizing few people. And that's not going to really make the huge impact in the pandemic. If you just vaccinate one population with leaving the rest of the wards, that's really not going to make a huge difference.
Okay, completely makes sense. So in a pandemic, it's more than just one parameter of a vaccine. It's a whole host of things, like how much does it cost, how easily can we transport, can we manufacture at scale as well. And it seems that the Oxford vaccine does have clear advantages on all those factors. Right, okay.
Sure, it's just a formula of all these factors. You have to put them together, and that's will definitely be more important during pandemics than just making a vaccine that people need to take if they travel for rest. So that's a different situation, of course.
Excellent. So I think my takeaway from this conversation, Dr. Salman, is that we have groups who will probably not be able to take this vaccine. Say our children will not be able to take this vaccine, the pregnant women, the breastfeeding women, and people who have immunocompromised systems. They will need very careful risk-benefit assessments. So there are groups who are vulnerable and will probably not be able to take the vaccine. So it's very important that the healthy people who are able to take the vaccine should really do it in order to protect our vulnerable groups. Any concluding comments, Dr. Salman?
Yeah, that's completely true. I mean, at least until now, not all the people can take the vaccine, as you just mentioned, because maybe they are having some risk, or because we don't know enough data about it. So to protect these people, really, you need to vaccinate the most of the other healthy people, which is at least 60-70% of the people. Then you break the chain of the transmission and you protect these people's lives, which is mainly they will be vulnerable people, and they have they might express the severe conditions if they are infected. So that's the perfect way to protect them from that.
We hope that most of our healthy people will take the vaccine and we will be able to put an end to the pandemic. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Salman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tasnim. It was a pleasure. Thank you.